Welcome to Orca Boats. My name's Rod. So the next project that I'm going to be working on in a series of videos is building a new kayak for a customer. It is the SCADA high volume version, which we do sell the plans for on my website. So hopefully I will be able to put together a series of videos with maybe one coming out each week on the various process. Say is that we are in the middle of the coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic. And since we're in the middle of this pandemic, we're only really supposed to go out for emergency services, such as purchasing food, if you've had to make a medical appointments. We're not visiting family, we're not visiting friends, and we're certainly not getting out and getting a haircut. So it's getting a little bit long. I'm going to be wearing a hat through this series of videos, but at least I can say I still have my hair. Unlike a few other boat building friends of mine, you know who you are. So I've pulled my box beam down from the rafters, and what I have here is a 16-foot beam built in two sections, two 8-foot sections, in which I've laid down on the top a platform. There are some spacers inside the box beam that hold it nice and rigid. And the two sections are then held together by a shorter section which is inserted inside. So on the top of the box beam, I have a center line right down from end to end. I don't recall whether I used a string line or a laser line at the time. Then marked out in 12-inch increments spacing all along the beam. Then I simply attached each block, maybe just holding my framing square like this, lining up the center line across the top down there. So I end up with a center line right through all of the riser blocks along the beam at 12-inch spacing. The only difference in the form spacing will be here in the stern. The blocks were 12 inches apart, but these two blocks need to be a little closer together. And the reason for that is there will be a riser in front here holding form number 15. And on the end, we need to put the riser on the stern facing block with the form facing forward, because we're going to attach an end form and stick it out the end here. So we'll end up with the forward face of form number 16 will be 12 inches from the forward face of form number 15 in front of it. So to each block, I'm just pushing through my carriage bolt, adding a washer and a wing nut, and I like the wing nuts because they become a one-handed operation to be able to tighten up the riser which will go on top. I have all my riser blocks cut. I've got all of them cut on my crosscut sled to be exactly the same height, except for the two that will go on the very ends. And I like those to be a little bit higher than the ones in the middle, in case the beam is a little bit humped in the middle or a little bit sagged in the middle. I'm able to take a string line between the two ends and raise and lower these riser blocks using the slots that I've cut in here, which sit into here. I can move them left and right, and I can move them up and down. So now I've stretched this taut string line between center line of the riser at the bow end to the center line of the riser at the stern end, and I can now begin to put in the rest of the risers by sliding them in, lining up the center line. And what I can do is I can raise it up so that the very top of the riser is just touching that string line. And then I will carry on with all the rest of the risers down the center of the beam. So what I end up having is a perfect vertical center line through the boat, and the tops of all of these risers, if they're all nicely up to the string and touching on the center line, the tops of all these risers are a common horizontal line through the boat. Off camera, I've cut out a set of forms from the set of plans. Just the paper, cutting it out roughly, and then using some Super 77 spray glue, spraying it, sticking it on the plywood, and then cutting them out with a bandsaw. So we have on there all of the markings necessary to line it up. You have the shear line, the water line, and various horizontal lines through the plans, and we'll use those horizontal lines to line up to the riser. So the next thing will be is to mark and drill some holes to where I can attach with some more wing nuts and carriage bolts to the risers. And the easiest way to do that is to just bring it up to the riser here, marking or roughly putting it on the horizontal center line and the vertical center line, and I'm just going to draw a mark on here where I need to where I need to drill some holes for the carriage bolts to go through. I'll just then take a ruler and join up those lines, and we can mark them if you want. So that's the shear, this is the water line, and that's the center line. So before I attach all the forms to the risers, I need a method to attach the end form, in this case the stern end form, to form number 16, and it's going to lay sort of dead center, half on either side of center line, and I'm just going to glue some blocks to my end form itself, and I just want to make sure that it's not going to interfere with the holes that I'm going to use to hold this unit to the riser. Wood glue on 2 blocks and kind of rub them together there, get glue on both, and then I will set it onto here and clamp in place. Now the main thing is I want to make sure that these are flush, in other words not sticking out past this edge, but I want them nice and clean. So the thing is with clamps like these sorts here, you clamp down and things tend to slide a bit. I don't want to clamp too hard, and just check to see that it's not slipped and moved. And we'll let that glue set. In the meantime, I can start to attach my forms to the risers. So while the glue is drying on my blocks and the end forms, I'm just going to start to attach my forms to my risers. So I'm using a horizontal line at 2.5 inches above water line, and I'm going to tighten her down as I've done before, pulling the heads of the carriage bolts in, and then I can just adjust. So I'm looking for the center line on the back is with the riser. This is coming down here, and that's on center there. I guess it should be noted that all of these forms are being attached upside down, as I'm going to be building the hull first. So the risers on this particular model are not actually high enough. So what's happening is the bottom, or the deck side of form number 8, which is the larger one, is actually hitting the wing nuts down the bottom. So I'm going to leave that one. I'll have to make a slight minor adjustment and cut out the form itself, which will be fine in building the deck to have a little bit of a slot in there. And I guess also it should be noted that I'm lining up the center line on the top of the riser using the paper side, which is the more accurate side than me tracing around lines to the other side. Could be off a little bit. So what I did on form number 8 was I set it up in here and just kind of marked where I needed to kind of hack out a bit of the form so that it'll overlay on the wing nuts. And then when I brought it back to the boat, I realized that I had this in upside down. This should have gone in this way for me to be cutting the slots down below. Of course, I suppose I could have just cut out a whole other form and not shown that little error there, but I don't think it's that devastating in that we can still build a boat. Now that I have all of the forms set up onto the risers on the strongback, I think the glue should be dry on the little blocks holding the end forms. And again, we're just going to need to figure out a way to attach the end form to the last form at the end of the beams. Now I could just take some paper off and glue these together. I kind of like it to be able to dismantle if I need to get this end form out for whatever reason, or just this form out sometime down the road. I may have a difficulty once strips are attached to a stem or something, so I suppose I could just drive some screws through here, but I think I'm going to go with drilling some holes through the blocks and attach some more wing nuts. Now this gives me a little bit more adjustment. I don't think it really matters where I drill these holes. The bolts I'm using are 1/4 inch, so I've bumped up 3 or 4 drill sizes just so there's a bit of play in here. I've got a scrap piece of lumber on my workbench so I don't drill into my workbench. And I'm just going to touch. Now if I lay this on top, exactly where it needs to go, you'll see that it needs to be centered. So the center of this end form plywood needs to be on the center line. I'm going to check on the top and the bottom. And it needs to be flush with here. We can see that the shear line is marked on both. I can just put a pencil through and make a mark where I need to drill a hole through. So on these two forms, it's going to help if I have the 2.5 inch horizontal water line on both sides. So I've done it on the one, and I'll just repeat it on this one here. And the reason being is that I will end up attaching to the riser on this side cutting out and making all the forms. I also made the inside and outside stems. So they're laminated over the end forms. In this case I have simple soft red cedar as the inside stem. The inside stem is the strips will be glued to, and then it will be capped with the outside stem, and that's in mahogany. If you want to see how these were made, I didn't going to show it in this series of videos, but I do have the video of building inside and outside stems on my playlist of kayak building. So with the end forms and strips coming down here and bending down towards the floor, those exert pressure on the end form and want to lift it up. So what I've done right now is I have clamped in a square so that I know that my number 2 form is perfectly vertical. And the other thing is that if I put 2 or 3 strips on this side under tension, it may very well want to pull the end form off center, which would be not a very good thing. So what I'm going to do is I have a little block like this and a couple of screws. So to prevent it from going left or right, I'm going to put a little bit of a brace underneath here. So right now I know that is the proper height, so I'll push the brace right up underneath it. And then I've got a string which I'm going to just kind of eyeball through by stretching through the vertical center line on 2 or 3 forms. And by eyeballing down the end of it, I can see that this end form needs to move over a little bit, so I'm going to push it over. I'm going to take a screw and I'm going to drive that right into the end of the beam here. And now a little bit I can still adjust because I can pivot this end block as needed, left or right, if I need to push it over any further. So I think we'll leave it there for this week's episode. Got all the forms set up. There will be some minor adjustments to make sure that all of the vertical center line on all the forms line up, and using the water line as a horizontal line on all the forms, make sure they all line up. I may use a laser level or some strings, but we'll take care of that. Once it's all lined up perfectly, then we can start building this kayak. And as always, thank you very much for tuning in. Consider giving us a thumbs up and a like, maybe becoming a subscriber, and stay tuned for more videos on building the Scana High Volume here at Orca Boats.